Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've been collecting and restoring vintage radios for over 20 years. It started as a hobby when I was a teenager, something my grandfather got me into before he passed. He had a workshop full of old electronics, tube radios from the 1940s, transistor sets from the 1960s, equipment that most people would have thrown away decades ago. He taught me how to bring them back to life, how to replace worn components and trace faulty wiring and coax sound from machines that hadn't spoken in years. My name is Fletcher Holden. I'm 41 years old, and I run a small electronics repair shop in Danbury, Connecticut. Mostly, I fix modern stuff, phones and laptops and tablets, whatever pays the bills. But my real passion is the vintage equipment, finding old radios at estate sales and flea markets, restoring them to working condition, selling them to collectors who appreciate the craftsmanship of an earlier era. I thought I knew everything there was to know about old radios. 2 months ago, I found one that proved me wrong. It came from an estate sale outside of town, buried in a pile of broken equipment that I bought for almost nothing. When I finally got it working, it picked up a broadcast that shouldn't exist. A news broadcast from 1997, except the events being reported never happened. The president they mentioned never served. The wars they described were never fought. The world they lived in wasn't the world I remembered from 1997. And the broadcast wasn't a recording. It was live, from a version of 1997 that was experiencing something terrible, something that consumed their entire reality in less than 3 weeks. I've been listening ever since, and what I've heard has made me afraid of what's coming for our world too. The estate sale was at an old house about 20 minutes outside of town. The belongings of a man named Harold Pembroke, who had died at 93 with no family and no friends to speak of. According to the neighbors, Pembroke had been a recluse for decades, some kind of engineer or scientist, they said, though nobody knew the details. He'd worked for the government back in the 60s and 70s, then retired and spent the rest of his life alone in that house. When I arrived, the place was full of strange equipment, electronics I couldn't identify, half-finished projects, machines that looked like they'd been built by hand for purposes I couldn't guess. Most of it was too damaged or incomplete to be worth anything. I bought 3 boxes of salvageable parts for $50. Figured I could use the components for restoration projects, maybe find a hidden gem buried in the junk. The radio was at the bottom of the 3rd box. It was heavy, maybe 20 pounds, with a wooden case that had been hand-finished with obvious care. The dial on the front didn't match any frequency system I recognized. Not AM, not FM, not shortwave. The numbers and markings seemed arbitrary, following a logic I couldn't decipher. There was no brand name anywhere on the case, no model number, no manufacturing marks of any kind. Hand-built, clearly, but with a precision that suggested professional expertise. Whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing. I spent weeks trying to get it working. The tubes were burned out, the wiring was corroded, the power supply had failed entirely. I had to rebuild almost everything from scratch, guessing at specifications based on the components I could identify. When I finally turned it on, I expected static, or silence, or maybe some faint signal from a station operating on an unusual frequency. Instead, I heard voices, a news broadcast, professional quality, with an anchor reading the day's headlines. I almost turned it off, assuming I'd somehow picked up a local station despite the strange dial settings. But something made me pause. The anchor mentioned the president by name. It wasn't the president who had served in 1997. He went on to describe current events, and none of them matched anything I remembered. Wars in countries that didn't exist, political crises I'd never heard of, a world that sounded familiar but wrong, like a photograph that had been subtly altered. Then the anchor mentioned the date. September the 14th, 1997, a date that had passed in our world nearly 30 years ago. But to whoever was broadcasting, it was today. I listened obsessively over the following days. The radio only picked up one station, but it broadcast constantly. News programs, weather reports, commercials for products I'd never heard of, talk shows discussing events that had never occurred in my world. All from a version of 1997 that wasn't the one I remembered living through. The differences were countless. In their world, the Cold War had ended differently. The Soviet Union had collapsed later than in our history, and the collapse had been more violent, fragmenting into different nations than the ones we knew. Different alliances had formed in the aftermath. Different conflicts had erupted. Their technology had developed along different paths. They talked about things that didn't exist in our 1997. Innovations that sounded advanced even by today's standards. And they didn't mention things that had defined our era, technologies and events that had shaped our world, but apparently never happened in theirs. It was recognizable as Earth, as human civilization. But it was a different branch, a different path, a different history. And something was going wrong. The news reports began mentioning strange phenomena almost immediately. Blackouts spreading across entire regions with no explained cause. Communication systems failing for hours at a time. People across the country reporting feelings of wrongness, of disconnection, of reality feeling thin and uncertain. Scientists were being interviewed about unexplained readings from instruments that measured things I didn't understand. Government officials appeared on air to urge calm, but I could hear the strain in their voices. They were scared. Something was happening in that other 1997, and I couldn't stop listening. Over the following weeks, the broadcast changed. The news grew more urgent. The strange phenomena were spreading, intensifying. What had started as isolated incidents was becoming a global crisis. The reports described it in fragments, pieced together from different sources. Something was wrong with their reality itself. The fabric of existence was coming apart at the seams. People were disappearing, not dying, not going missing in the conventional sense, vanishing, being erased from existence. One report described a family of 4 who had simply ceased to exist while eating dinner. Their neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual. When police investigated, they found the house empty, the table set for a meal, the food still warm. But no one could remember who had lived there. The house had always been empty, according to every record and every memory except for the one witness who had seen them through the window moments before they vanished. Entire buildings would flicker and fade, replaced by empty lots that had supposedly always been empty. Streets that people swore they'd walked down their entire lives simply weren't there anymore, and no one else remembered them ever existing. Memories were becoming unreliable. Historical records contradicted each other. The past itself seemed to be changing, being rewritten, consumed by something that left nothing behind. The broadcasters tried to maintain professionalism, but I could hear the fear in their voices. The anchor would pause mid-sentence, struggling to find words for things that shouldn't be possible. Reports would cut off suddenly, replaced by silence or static. When the broadcast resumed, sometimes the anchor would be different. The previous one apparently gone without explanation. Fewer and fewer stations were still broadcasting. The infrastructure was failing, or being erased, or both. One broadcast included an interview with a scientist trying to explain what was happening. She was a physicist, her voice calm but strained, choosing her words carefully. She described their reality as a bubble, a contained space that existed alongside countless other bubbles, other realities, separated by barriers that normally couldn't be crossed. Something had punctured their bubble. She didn't know what, didn't know how, but something was draining it, consuming the very substance of their existence. Their world wasn't just dying, she said. It was being eaten, devoured by something that existed in the space between realities, something vast and patient and endlessly hungry. The interviewer asked if there was anything that could be done. The scientist was quiet for a long moment. No, she said finally. There was nothing they could do. The puncture couldn't be repaired. The consumption couldn't be stopped. All they could do was document what was happening and hope that somehow, somewhere, someone would learn from their fate. Then the broadcast cut to static. When it resumed, the scientist was gone, and no one on the air seemed to remember the interview had happened. The broadcast became increasingly fragmented as the days passed, long stretches of static interrupted by brief moments of transmission, voices cutting in and out, words lost to interference that wasn't interference. I had to piece together what was happening from fragments. The world on the other side was falling apart. Major cities had gone dark, their populations simply gone. The broadcast came from smaller and smaller stations, skeleton crews keeping the signal alive when everyone else had vanished. One voice in particular kept appearing, a man who identified himself only as a night shift engineer at a radio station in what I gathered was somewhere in the Midwest of their world. He said he was going to keep broadcasting until the end. Someone should know what happened, he said. Someone should remember them. His voice became familiar to me over those final days. Tired but determined, scared but refusing to give up. He described what he could see from the station windows. The sky had changed color, he said, shifting through shades that didn't have names, colors that shouldn't exist. The horizon looked wrong, like the world ended too close, like you could walk to the edge of everything in an afternoon. He could feel reality getting thinner, could sense the void pressing in from all sides. His colleagues had disappeared one by one, not died, just stopped existing. Their desks sat empty, their names were forgotten. He would mention someone he'd worked with for years, then pause, then admit He couldn't quite remember who he'd been talking about. He was alone now, talking into a microphone in an empty building, hoping someone somewhere could hear him. The final transmission came on what the engineer said was October 3rd, 1997. Less than 3 weeks after the first broadcast I'd heard, his voice was different that night, calmer, resigned. He said the building was starting to fade. He could see through the walls now, he said. The studio around him was becoming transparent, revealing something beyond that he couldn't quite describe. The void was beautiful, he told me, in a terrible way, endless and dark and patient, waiting just outside the thinning membrane of reality, waiting to finish what it had started. He said he wasn't afraid anymore. Fear seemed pointless when there was nothing left to lose. He apologized for not being able to stop it, for not being able to save anyone, for being the last voice of a world that was about to become nothing. Then the broadcast cut to static, and the static never stopped. I waited by the radio for days, hoping for something, anything, a survivor hiding somewhere the void hadn't reached, a voice proving that something had endured. Nothing came, just static, empty and endless and cold. The other 1997 was gone, an entire world consumed, billions of people erased from existence, their history swallowed by something I couldn't see or comprehend. And I was left with nothing but static and the memory of what I'd heard. I should have turned off the radio, should have put it away, tried to forget it, gone back to my normal life. But I needed to understand. I started investigating Harold Pembroke, the man who had owned the radio, asked questions around town, searched through public records, tracked down anyone who might have known him. Pembroke had worked for a government research facility in the 1960s and 1970s. The facility had been shut down decades ago, its records classified, its very existence scrubbed from most official sources. But rumors persisted about what they'd been researching. Experiments involving signals and frequencies, the nature of reality itself, ways to detect things that existed beyond the normal boundaries of the physical world. One old neighbor, a man in his 80s, who had lived next to Pembroke for 40 years, told me the most. Pembroke had talked to him sometimes, in the rambling way that lonely old men talk to whoever will listen. He'd said he helped build equipment that could detect parallel worlds, radios that could pick up signals from other versions of Earth, frequencies that existed between the normal bands, carrying broadcasts from realities that weren't quite ours. When the project was shut down, Pembroke had kept one of the radios, spent decades listening to broadcasts from worlds that weren't his own. The neighbor said Pembroke had grown increasingly disturbed in his final years. He kept hearing the same thing he told the neighbor. Worlds that were fine, then worlds in crisis, then silence. Over and over, across dozens of frequencies, realities dying one after another. Something was out there, Pembroke believed, something that moved through the space between worlds, consuming them one by one, and he was terrified that it was only a matter of time before it reached their world too. People thought he was crazy, just a paranoid old man with strange ideas. Now he was dead, and I had his radio, and I had heard exactly what he described. Since the broadcast went silent, I've been watching my own world differently, looking for the signs that preceded the collapse of the other 1997, the blackouts, the communication disruptions, the feelings of wrongness that people reported before the erasures began. I didn't have to look hard. News stories about unexplained power failures that engineers can't explain. Reports of communication systems going down across entire regions, blamed on solar activity or technical glitches, but never convincingly. And if you look online, if you search in the right places, you find thousands of people describing feelings of disconnection, of unreality, the sense that something is wrong with the world, even if they can't explain what. Forums full of people discussing moments when reality felt thin, when the ground seemed less solid, when familiar places looked subtly wrong. I recognized the pattern, the same progression I heard in the broadcasts from the other 1997. It starts small, isolated incidents that can be explained away, feelings that can be dismissed as anxiety or imagination. Then it spreads, intensifies, becomes harder to ignore, and then the disappearances begin. I've experienced it myself. Moments when my shop doesn't feel quite real. When I look at shelves I've stocked 1,000 times and something seems different, moved, changed in ways I can't identify. Times when I reach for objects that aren't there, remember conversations that didn't happen, find myself certain of things that turn out not to be true. My own reality is becoming uncertain. The same symptoms the people in the other 1997 reported before their world ended. The other 1997 went from first signs to total collapse in less than 3 weeks. If the same thing is starting here, we might not have much time. Or maybe it's slower in this reality. Maybe we have months, years, decades. I don't know. I only know that it's coming. Last week, the radio changed. The static that had filled the frequency since the other 1997 went silent began to shift. New sounds emerged from the white noise. Not broadcast from the dead world. Something else. Whispers. Not words exactly, but almost words. Voices that might be human or might be something pretending to be human. Sometimes I think I hear the engineer, the one who broadcast until the end. His voice comes through the static, distorted and distant, like it's traveling from somewhere very far away. But the voice is wrong. The cadence is off. The words don't quite make sense. Like something is wearing his voice without understanding how to use it. I think I'm hearing the void itself, the thing that consumed the other world. It's in the static now, present in the frequency that once carried a dying world's last words, and it knows I'm listening. I can feel its attention sometimes, pressing through the speaker like a weight, an awareness vast and patient and curious. It's not hostile exactly, not malevolent in any way I can describe. It's just hungry. And I'm something it hasn't tasted yet. I understand now why Pembroke kept the radio all those years. Not just to listen, to monitor, to track the thing as it moved from world to world, to know when it was getting close. The static is a warning, and the whispers are getting clearer every day. I've tried turning off the radio, unplugging it, locking it in a closet, but I can still hear it sometimes. Late at night, in the silence of my apartment, the whisper of static at the edge of hearing. Voices that aren't quite voices, speaking words that aren't quite words. The radio opened a door somewhere, or maybe the door was always there, and the radio just let me see it. Either way, something knows I'm here now. Something that has consumed countless worlds and is still hungry. Something that is getting closer. I'm sharing this because someone needs to know. What happened to the other 1997 could happen here, maybe is already happening. If you've been feeling like the world isn't quite right lately, pay attention to that feeling. If reality seems thinner than it used to, if you've had moments of disconnection or uncertainty, you might be sensing what I'm sensing. The first signs of something vast and patient turning its attention this way. I don't know how to stop it. The scientist in the other world said it couldn't be stopped. That once the consumption began, there was nothing to do but wait for the end. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe there's something that can be done, some way to fight back. But I don't know what it is. All I can do is watch and listen and wait. I still turn on the radio every night. The whispers are louder now, more distinct. I think I can almost understand them sometimes, almost make out words in the static, messages from the void, or from the things that live there, or from the remnants of the worlds they've consumed. Part of me doesn't want to understand. Part of me thinks that understanding might be the end, that once I can hear what they're saying, I'll be close enough for them to reach. But I can't stop listening. The engineer said the void was beautiful in a terrible way. I think I'm starting to understand what he meant. There's something mesmerizing about it. The static that isn't static. The whispers that aren't whispers. The sense of something endless and ancient and patient, waiting just beyond the edge of perception. I hope I never have to see it for myself. But the whispers keep getting clearer, and some nights, through the static, I can hear something else. Breathing, slow and deep and patient, the sound of something vast, taking its time, waiting for the moment when this world is ready to be consumed, just like all the others before it. The other 1997 had 3 weeks from first signs to silence. I don't know how long this world has. I don't know if the signs I'm seeing are the beginning of our end, or just echoes of what happened somewhere else. But I know that Harold Pembroke spent decades listening to worlds die, and he was certain that eventually the thing in the void would come for us too. I keep his radio on my workbench now. Every night I listen to the static. Every night the whispers get a little clearer. And every night I wonder if tomorrow will be the day it starts. The blackouts, the erasures, the collapse of everything we know. The engineer kept broadcasting until the end because he wanted someone to remember. I'm writing this for the same reason. If our world goes silent, if we become nothing but static on a frequency no one is listening to, maybe this will survive somehow. Maybe someone in another reality will find it. Maybe they'll hear our story the way I heard the other 1997, and maybe, unlike me, they'll find a way to stop it. The static is speaking again. I should turn off the radio and go to sleep. But I can almost understand the words now. Almost. And part of me needs to know what they're saying. Even if knowing is the end of everything. Even if understanding means becoming part of the void myself. The engineer said he wasn't afraid anymore at the end. I wonder if I'll feel the same way when my turn comes. I wonder if the void really is beautiful. I guess I'll find out soon enough. The whispers are getting louder, and somewhere in the static, something is waiting, patient and hungry and vast, waiting for us.